Have you ever stopped to think how far a mother is willing to go out of love for her children? How much she would endure, even in the face of pain, loss, and the absolute silence of death? In today's video, you will discover one of the most powerful and forgotten stories in Scripture, the story of Rizpah. Risper did not wield weapons, she gave no speeches, she did not sit on thrones. But what she did, alone on a barren hill under the scorching sun and the freezing nights, echoed through the centuries like a silent cry of love and dignity. Who was this woman named Rizpah? Why did her actions shake the heart of King David and alter the course of Israel's history? What lies behind the silence of a mother who, though ignored by the world, was heard by heaven? The answer lies in her quiet courage, her unwavering loyalty, and the strength of a love that knows no boundaries. Prepare yourself to understand a story filled with pain, faith, and hope. A story that teaches us that sometimes the simplest gestures are the ones that bring about the greatest transformations. Rizpah is living proof that true love remains standing, even when everything around it falls apart. Try to imagine the scene. A mother alone, with no shelter, no comfort, facing the relentless heat of the desert by day and the biting cold of night, all to protect what remained of her son's dignity. Not to save them from death, for they were already dead, but to prevent their bodies from being desecrated. This woman was Rizpah. Her name appears only a few times in the Bible, but every line about her carries a moving depth. Rizpah, concubine of King Saul, was not remembered for eloquent words or high positions. She is remembered for her silent, steadfast, and incredibly loving action, the kind of love that does not end even when the lives of her sons have already ended. She was the daughter of Abner, from the people of the Hivites, in other words, a foreigner, someone who was not born as part of the people of Israel. Even so, she was brought into the palace and became Saul's concubine, the first king of Israel. She was inside the walls of power, but outside the circle of honor. Her presence was quiet, almost invisible, until the day her pain made her unforgettable. Rizpah had two sons with Saul, Armoni and Mephibosheth. It is important to clarify that this Mephibosheth is not Jonathan's son, the grandson of Saul, who became lame and was later received by David. This is a different Mephibosheth, the son of Rizpah and the king, and just as forgotten as his mother. But the silence of human history is not the silence of God. What men ignore, the Lord observes. And Rizpah, who could have been just another forgotten name on the margins of the biblical account, became a symbol of faithfulness and resilience. In this video, you will discover every detail the Bible reveals about one of the most moving women in Scripture, Rizpah. Her story, although wrapped in pain and silence, becomes a powerful testimony of love that surpasses death, of courage in the face of tragedy, and of persevering faith in times of abandonment. But to truly understand the weight of her journey, we need to go back in time and examine the turbulent context in which she lived. The political and spiritual landscape of Israel was far from stable. After the death of Saul, the first king of Israel, the throne was left in dispute. There was no undisputed successor. His son Ishbosheth was declared king by part of the people, taking over the rule of the majority of the tribes. However, the tribe of Judah had taken a different path. They already recognized David as their legitimate leader. This political division created a visible rupture in the kingdom. On one side, Ishbosheth ruled the north. On the other, David was strengthening his power in the south. It was a time of constant tension where any movement could be interpreted as betrayal. Any alliance could be seen as conspiracy. It was an era in which suspicion walked hand in hand with power. And so that you do not get confused by the names, here is an important clarification. Ishbosheth was the legitimate son of Saul, appointed as heir by his supporters. Mephibosheth, son of Rizpah, was his half-brother, also a descendant of Saul but born of a concubine, which placed him in a politically delicate position. In addition to them, there was another Mephibosheth, much better known, the son of Jonathan and grandson of Saul, who became crippled in childhood. Amid this dispute between the houses of Saul and David, one crucial name begins to stand out: Abner. He was not merely the commander of Saul's army. He was the true pillar that supported the crumbling dynasty. With his military strength and strategic influence, Abner was seen as the man behind the throne, the one who, with his loyalty and authority, still kept alive the hope of preserving Saul's lineage. Abner was much more than a general. He was a man of prestige, influence, and strategic skill. For many years, it was he who politically sustained the house of Saul after the king's death. His name carried weight, and his presence commanded respect. But at a certain moment, everything began to fall apart. The tension reached its peak when Ishbosheth, son of Saul and king over the northern tribes, made a grave accusation. He claimed that Abner had slept with Rizpah. At first glance, it might seem like an ordinary suspicion, an internal misunderstanding, or even a malicious rumor. But in that context, the accusation was extremely serious. Risper had been a concubine of the late King Saul, and according to the customs of that time, taking for oneself a woman who had belonged to the former king was an act loaded with symbolism. It was like publicly claiming succession to the throne. In practice, it was a political gesture, almost a declaration that the throne should now belong to whoever took possession of that woman. Ishbosheth knew this, and that is precisely why he reacted with such alarm. That supposed relationship did not seem to him to be the result of mere personal attraction. In the eyes of the king, it was a move of conquest, a calculated step toward power. And the most concerning part was who was behind that step. Abner. He was not just any man. He was the architect of the kingdom's stability. He had control over the military forces, influenced tribal leaders, and was, without a doubt, the strongest figure within the government structure. If anyone there had the capacity to take the throne, that someone was Abner. Ishbosheth saw the closeness between Abner and Rizpah as a direct and immediate threat to his reign. And he was right. Because in those days, joining oneself to a former wife or concubine of the king was not just a matter of intimacy. It was a declaration of power, a gesture of claim. It was as if to say, "Now I am the rightful heir to all that belonged to Saul." At that time, such a gesture was not merely interpreted as symbolic, it was a full declaration of authority. In many cultures of antiquity, generals and ambitious leaders resorted to similar strategies. They would become involved with women who had belonged to the former king, gain prestige among the old monarch's allies, and thereby legitimize their own claims to the throne. It was a silent kind of coup, but incredibly effective. And Ishbosheth knew that. He knew exactly what was at stake. The suspicion had been cast, and the consequence did not take long to come. Abner, when accused, became deeply outraged. It was not only a matter of wounded honor, it was a complete rupture of trust. After all, he had been the backbone of Ishbosheth's reign, the strategist who kept the authority of Saul's son alive. And now, without a shred of evidence, he was treated as a traitor. He felt disregarded, insulted. It was the breaking point. Abner not only distanced himself from the house of Saul, he completely abandoned the project of preserving the old throne. He went to David, the man he had fought against for years as an adversary, and offered his loyalty. With that gesture, Ishbosheth's greatest support now served the one who had been anointed by God to rule over Israel. From that moment on, the fate of Ishbosheth was sealed. Without Abner's backing, his leadership quickly weakened. The tribes, sensing the instability, began to drift away. The throne, which had already been barely holding together, collapsed without resistance. Ishbosheth, now without allies or political strength, became vulnerable. A short time later, he was assassinated by two of his own officers. No guards, no escape, no outcry. A silent end to a fragile reign. And so, with the throne finally vacant and the tribes weary of war, David was recognized as king over all of Israel. The division between north and south was dissolved, the civil war came to an end, and a new era began, marked by unity, stability, and the fulfillment of God's promise. As time passed, a deep crisis fell upon Israel. It was not a war. It was not an external enemy. It was the heavens that grew silent, and the earth that stopped yielding its fruit. For 3 consecutive years, the nation faced a devastating famine. The crops failed, food became scarce, and the people lived in agony. Not even King David, with all his power and wisdom, was able to reverse that desolate situation. It was a calamity that no military force could resolve. But there was something behind that prolonged drought. It was not merely a natural phenomenon. The king, sensitive to the voice of God, understood that it was more than just a lack of rain. It was a divine sign. David then sought the Lord in prayer, looking for an explanation, and God responded clearly. That famine was the result of an old injustice still unresolved, a hidden error from the past, but one that cried out for justice before the God who sees all. The guilt fell upon Saul, the former king of Israel. He had broken a sacred covenant by attempting to exterminate a people who were meant to be preserved, the Gibeonites. To understand the weight of this revelation, we need to go even further back in time, to the days of Joshua, the leader who succeeded Moses in the conquest of the Promised Land. At that time, the Gibeonites, fearing destruction at the hands of the Israelites, acted shrewdly. They pretended to be foreigners from a distant land and pleaded for a peace agreement. Joshua and the leaders of Israel, without consulting the Lord, made a treaty with them, swearing to spare them. And although the covenant was born out of deception, it was made before God, and therefore it was inviolable. As part of that agreement, the Gibeonites came to live among the Israelites, performing humble tasks. They cut wood and carried water for the altar of the Lord, and so they remained, generation after generation, under the protection of the covenant. But when Saul took the throne, everything changed. For reasons the Bible does not fully detail, perhaps political zeal, perhaps sheer contempt, Saul broke that covenant. He launched a violent persecution against the Gibeonites, promoting a massacre that should never have occurred. In the time of King David, that old injustice, forgotten by men, reached the presence of God as a debt still unsettled. The broken covenant with the Gibeonites needed to be addressed. The word that had been given and violated demanded reparation. Because the God of Israel is faithful even when men are not. He honors covenants, even those made under imperfect circumstances, and he does not ignore when they are broken in blood. Upon understanding the gravity of what had been revealed, David did not make excuses. He did not try to justify Saul's actions or cover the error with political speech. Instead, he summoned the leaders of the Gibeonites to hear them sincerely, and he asked a direct question, filled with repentance and responsibility. What can I do so that this guilt may be removed from the land? 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 3. The Gibeonites did not allow themselves to be corrupted by riches. They did not ask for gold nor for silver. They also did not demand revenge against the people of Israel as a whole. But they were clear. The reparation could not be superficial. The house of Saul, which had broken the covenant, needed to answer for it. And then came the demand. 7 descendants of King Saul were to be handed over, to be executed, not out of hatred, but as a public sign of justice, a symbolic act before the Lord to serve as atonement for the breaking of the covenant, a recognition of the seriousness of that sin before God and men. David understood that the famine afflicting the nation would only cease when that guilt was dealt with proper seriousness. Therefore, even with sorrow, he promised to deliver the 7 men requested by the Gibeonites. It was at that point that Rizpah's pain broke through the silence behind the scenes of history and placed itself before the entire nation. Among the 7 condemned were her 2 sons, Armoni and Mephibosheth, not Saul's grandson, the son of Jonathan, but Rizpah's son. The other 5 chosen were sons of Merab, the eldest daughter of Saul. David, faithful to the covenant he had made with his friend Jonathan, did not allow Saul's grandson to be touched. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the one who became crippled as a child, was spared. But Rizpah's sons did not have the same fate. They were among the 7 descendants handed over to the Gibeonites. Scripture reports that these 7 men were taken to a hill and there hanged before the Lord at the beginning of the barley harvest, probably in the month of April. The act was public, solemn, and painful. There were no private ceremonies. There was no dignity in their end. Their bodies were exposed, hanging in the open air as a silent testimony before the community, as a visible marker of justice being executed, and a collective plea for the end of the curse that plagued the land. Now pause for a moment and try to imagine that scene. 7 bodies swaying in the wind, no burial, no grave, only the bare hill, the dry air, the silent sky, the people standing at a distance, and among them all, only one person remained, Rizpah, the forgotten woman of the palace, the mother of two of the condemned. Rizpah did not scream, did not protest, nor did she try to stop what was already irreversible. She simply stayed. With a sackcloth, the symbol of deepest mourning and bitterest humiliation, she built a makeshift shelter upon a rock, very close to the place of execution. And there, before the bodies of her sons, she sat. She did not remain there just for a few hours, nor for a few days. Risper stayed there for weeks, for months, alone. During the day, she would wave away the vultures with trembling hands as they circled the bodies, trying to preserve at least a shred of honor. At night, she kept watch with weary eyes, fighting the cold, the sleep, and the pain that would not go away. Risper became a silent sentinel, not only a grieving mother, but a shield between the shame and the memory of her sons. In the culture of Israel, leaving a body unburied was more than negligence. It was a sign of a curse. According to the law recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 26, a body given over to the animals was a sign of divine judgment. It was as if to say that, even in death, that person had been rejected. Risper could not stop the sentence. She had no voice in the corridors of power, nor strength to intercede for her sons. But in the face of death and forgetfulness, she did what only a mother can do. She remained, not out of obligation, but out of love, not in hope of change, but in silent faithfulness. Her vigil lasted not just one night, nor a few days of customary mourning. The Bible reports that she stayed there at the foot of the bodies, from the beginning of the barley harvest until the start of the first autumn rains, a period that may have lasted up to 6 months, 6 full months, under the open sky. No shelter, no bed, no relief. During the day, the burning heat scorched her skin. During the night, the cold punished her bones. But Rizpah endured, not out of stubbornness, but out of honor, out of memory, out of love. She did not scream. She did not protest. She did not cry out for justice with words, but her presence spoke loudly. Her pain was a cry. Her silence was a living lament. She did not seek revenge, nor looks of pity. She only wanted her sons, even in death, not to be forgotten, that at the very least, their dignity would be preserved, while the people resumed their routines. While David, in Jerusalem, waited for the divine wrath to cease, while the nation slowly began to breathe again, Rizpah remained there, steadfast, unshakable, because true love does not end with death, because a child's dignity does not vanish with their final breath. For a mother, there is no abandonment when the heart still bleeds. And then, after so much time, the news reached the king. They told David about that woman who would not leave the hill, who day after day remained there, enduring sun, rain, wild animals, dust and oblivion, all for the sake of her sons. They brought word to David that Rizpah was still there, that her mourning was not a passing display nor a symbolic gesture. It was an act of profound love, a loyalty that not even death could erase. They told him that she chased away the vultures with her own hands, that she kept her eyes fixed on the bodies, as if her soul were watching over them night and day, that she slept on the hard rock, with no protection, just to ensure that no wild animal would violate what remained of her sons, that she did not do it out of vanity or to move the people, but simply because she did not know how to love halfway. Upon hearing this, the heart of David, the brave warrior, the anointed king, the man after God's own heart, was deeply moved. He, who had seen the pain of mourning mothers among the ruins of war, who had buried comrades on the battlefield, had never witnessed a pain so silent and so steadfast. He had never seen a love that, even in the face of death, refused to retreat. With a stirred spirit, David rose and gave an order. The bones of the 7 executed men were to be gathered. They would no longer remain exposed to disgrace. They would no longer be treated as cursed. They would be honored. But he did not stop there. David remembered an even older sorrow, the death of Saul and Jonathan years earlier at the hands of the Philistines. Their bodies had been displayed on the walls of Beth-shan, a cruel act of humiliation. Later, the brave men of Jabesh-Gilead rescued them and gave them burial, though far from their homeland. Now the king decided to repair that past, to gather what had been scattered, to honor the forgotten, to restore what had once been broken. He ordered the bones of Saul to be brought. He sent for the bones of Jonathan, and with them also those of Armoni, of Mephibosheth, the son of Rizpah, and of the other 5 descendants of the house of Saul. All were treated with reverence. And then, finally, they were taken to Zelah, in the land of Benjamin, the inheritance of the royal family. There the bodies were buried in the tomb of Saul's lineage. From that moment on, Rizpah's story began to carry a new meaning. She was no longer just a grieving mother mourning the death of her sons. She was not merely a woman trying to preserve the dignity of those who had been condemned. Her silent gesture went beyond the boundaries of mourning and became something greater, a protest against indifference, a voiceless cry against forgetfulness, a powerful lesson for an entire generation. Rizpah, who never held royal titles, who never sat in a place of honor, who never spoke before crowd, was the one who inspired the king to restore the honor of an entire household. And the Bible reveals something deep and full of symbolism. Only after that gesture, after the bones of Saul, of Jonathan, and of Rizpah's sons were removed from public exposure and buried with honor, did God once again look favorably upon Israel. The land, once dry and barren, began to yield its fruit again. The rain, which had seemed forgotten in the heavens, gently fell upon the soil. The cycle of life was restored. Hope began to sprout once more. But all of this did not happen by the strength of warriors, nor by victories on battlefields, nor through political strategies. The blessing did not return through the hands of the powerful. It came because of a silent act, a gesture of dignity born from pain, a mute cry made by a mother who refused to stop loving, even when everything seemed lost. Rizpah, alone, without weapons, without influence, faced abandonment, time, and scorn. And her unwavering faithfulness spoke louder than any words could have spoken. While so many remained silent in the face of injustice, while the mourning of others faded into the routine of the days, Rizpah remained, steadfast, faithful, watchful. For months, she guarded the remains of her sons, who had been unjustly executed. She fought against the animals, against forgetfulness and abandonment. She did not allow her sons to end their lives in the shame of dishonor. Her pain became intercession. Her presence became a living prayer before the throne of God. And it was this that reached the ears of the king. Not screams, not protests, but a testimony of love that refuses to die. When David heard what Rizpah had done, he understood that something sacred was present there, and he decided to act. Because of the quiet courage of a wounded woman, the bones of Saul, of Jonathan, and of the 7 descendants of the royal house were gathered with reverence and buried with dignity. And only then, the heavens opened. The rain fell. Peace returned, not because of conquest, but because of compassion, because of perseverance, because of a love that remained standing when all others had left. The story of Rizpah teaches us that sometimes the greatest acts of transformation are born from silence, that it is possible to change the course of a nation without moving from your place, that faithfulness, even in anonymity, can move the heart of God. Rizpah did not seek recognition. She simply loved until the end. And that love became redemption, not only for her sons, but for an entire lineage and for an entire people. And now I want to know from you, had you heard the story of Rizpah in the Bible? Leave your comment down below. Share this video so that more people can learn this powerful lesson. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you won't miss future content. May God bless your life with grace, strength, and hope.